What's up, future shred lords? Welcome back. Down to the fingers. We're going to be getting into the recording template and the importance of that, essentially with respect to working on backing tracks, because nothing kills your forward momentum more than have to sit around here dicking around with dropping tracks in and all the rest of this stuff. So basically, I'm going to show you the process that I use. Trust me, this took 5 or 6 years for me to figure it out. And it doesn't look like much, but over time, trust me, this will save you years of work, and you don't have to go through the frustration I did. So basically, number one is, as you can see, I've got like 3 separate sort of groupings of tracks here. The red ones here for the rhythm guitars, that's basically distortion stuff. Then I have a clean channel here, right? And then, of course, I have the bass guitar down below here in purple. And then I go through a series of steps. So when I record something, I'll record on this track here, okay, and I'll do a bass take. And when the bass take is done, it basically filters up to the limiter section. Then, of course, it goes up to the compressor section. And then, of course, it goes up one more time into this preamp, which then goes all the way up to the top here, where I have the master output, if you will, for the bass guitar. And of course, after that, I'm now doing some parallel stuff, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But that is the mega outs, the broad strokes, if you will. I basically do the raw recordings here, and I have 3 tracks because I like to stagger them, because you can actually individually control specific sort of sound files in Reaper, and that can be incredibly useful. Now, I guess you could chop it up and stuff like that, but it's just easier to do individual takes. Plus, I find that it's easier to get the recordings that much faster, because I can just concentrate on just little chunks rather than trying to get a 3 or 4 minute piece perfectly done, which isn't easy to do, right? So there's that. And of course, I want to do some editing. We're going to go over that. It goes up to a preamp section, which is me basically mimicking what you would get with a Neve board or an SSL or something. Of course, going up here again into the master track. From the master track itself, it then feeds down into very select parallel tracks that you see down here. Okay, so that right there is huge. You have the master output section here. Okay, where this is a collection, this blue one here is all the collection of all the instruments, the solos, the vocals, the keyboards, the different kinds of guitars, the atmospheric ones, the half distorted ones, the rhythm guitars and the cleans and stuff like that. And then down here, of course, these are the parallel tracks where I have like reverbs, and I'm doing some stereo widening in certain instances, and on other ones I'm doing some fancy studio tricks to make it sound beefier and sort of more powerful. Or shaping the top end to make it sound brighter. And of course, add something. You can't just crank the volume, and that's step number 1 here. So after I do all these recordings and whatnot, we'll use the guitars here, since that's probably going to be the most relevant when I'm doing rhythm guitars. All of these tracks, the left sides, the 4, and the right sides, the 4 here, they all feed up into this one track. You can see that, right? And that basically now gets fed into this series of effects. I'm using a transient shaper to sort of control at the beginning of each of the guitar lines, just maintain, because I'm using compression too. If you don't sort of measure it out with a bit of an I was going to say the SPL. In terms of the transient shaper, you can kind of squash the beginning of it, and that creates a problem. So I'm using that to feed into this limiter. Basically, this focuses the guitar. You can call it a compressor, limiter, compressor, whatever. But basically what it does is take like this wider sort of guitar signal and focuses it up so it sounds much tighter in the center. Then I go through this compression stage here, where I break the compression up into 2 separate EQ bands. In this case, the bottom one here is the low end and mid-range, and the top is the high mid-range and the high end. And you can sort of, basically use the same principles as a Pultec. Now listen, with a fancy plugin like this, I'm going to mention it right now, the order of operations is insanely important. When I do it, I turn the output volume down, because I'm outputting from this thing at roughly the same volume as what the guitars are being played at. But in this case, since I'm going to be turning these input gains up, I have to turn the output gain down. I don't touch the master gain. And then what I do is I adjust the crossover frequency in this case, and then I do the, basically this is a low pass filter, or high pass filter, I should say, in this case, that's controlling how the compressor reacts. So under this particular frequency here, about 40 hertz, there's nothing, it doesn't trigger the compressor at all. Then of course I come over here and I actually adjust the slope and the actual you know, the high and low pass filter itself with this zero and DC thrust for both the high and lows. Then I jump over here to the time constant, clean it up. Then I adjust the input gain to the point where I feel like it's starting to get really crispy. And then I start dialing in the threshold. As far as the low end is concerned, most of the time I'm cutting here. But you can see in this case, I drove the input, but then I just absolutely slaughtered the threshold. Okay, so in this case, it's tightening up again the low end. From there, I'm going to go into an EQ stage. And this is basically the EQ I'm using for the guitar. It's a done deal. From there, I'm basically bouncing up into this simple sort of, you know, simulation of a fader setup on an actual SSL board. Now, I have ones for a whole bunch of different types of boards. I don't know what this one is, maybe Neve or something like this, but this gets me to gain staging. I've got this wrong every single time. You can see up here, and this is a perfect example here. I'll make this thing bigger. Yeah. You can see up here, there's this input volume knob, and there's an output volume knob here. Okay, that's the master in and the master out. Okay, that'll control how much signals here and then how loud it is after you basically make an adjustment here, which will control the output. Then you have gain, and you also have the master output here. Well, that's the master output, but I mean the fader output. And then of course you also have like this little sort of compression function with this total harmonic distortion. We're not going to talk about that. Something else. But my point being here is gain staging is basically getting all of these four volumes to work in conjunction with themselves to create the sound that you actually want to hear. Meaning if it's guitar, it's big and fat and thick. So in this case, the guitar is pretty hot. So I massively decrease the input and output volume, but you can see I'm hitting it pretty hard here with 4.5 dB of gain, right? And then of course, all I did was turn this fader down and it's a done deal. And then just adjusted the output as necessary to about -5. And that gave me the gain staging architecture, if you will, to then send this track up to the SSL aspect where I do all the compression and the EQ and stuff. Okay, so realistically speaking, what this is doing is adding saturation. Okay, so driving this gain knob here, the line amp, okay, makes the guitar sound fatter and thicker. But I have to basically be very careful with the input and output volume and this master fader, and they all have to work in conjunction, all four of these elements. And basically these faders, when you see the, you know, the levels on them, and essentially they should be relatively equal. You shouldn't have one way up here at 0 and another one down here at -4. No, bring them both down to -4 and then increase the output volume, right? To get the desired effect. And then of course you have to be careful because I'm sending it from there all the way up here to the master output, right? So in this case, you can see me bring this up, and this is true about every single one of these tracks. Every one of these FX tracks is just this SSL G series 4000. Another basic sort of trick. This comes from the Jason Joshua stuff. I don't know if you know who that is, or he has a very famous sort of analog mix trick, which I couldn't get to work. But then when I started using the plugin alliance stuff, I'm like, why not put that fader there, drive up the saturation, and then put it into here, and I can drive up the saturation again. But now I have a lot more control in other ways too. Of course, by adding the EQ section here, you have the dynamic section with the compression, and I do expansion I think it sounds better with respect to electric guitars. And then your filtration. So that right there is a huge one. If you're going to get a channel strip, you can get this one, of course, from Plugin Alliance. And no, I don't get any money from them or anything like that. For like, you know, they go on sale on a regular basis for like 30 or 40 bucks. And sometimes you can get 2 or 3 plugins for about 60 bucks. And my point being here is you can get 2 or 3 channel strips, which come with all of this extra stuff. I think I have about 15. And trust me, these things come in handy because certain channel strips sound better on certain instruments than other ones. And that's just a fact. Okay, so that's a huge one right there. Is as you can see, again, I'm sort of driving it. Now, in this case, I'm not really touching these, these more global sort of volume ones. I'm only controlling the master here. And notice here, all of the volumes on the tracks, they're all at Unity 0, right? So I'm only using the fader now to basically control it. And it's really a combination of the two, right? I have to go down here to this one to bring up this other fader, which is the one that actually feeds this one, right? If I were to make this big here, we'll just throw it up to 102. This fader now feeds into this one. And when I set it up normally, basically I have a preset here which just sets everything to 0 and it's done. So then I can just start dialing everything in as I want to. And I basically do it in this order. I will set the volume, then I adjust the expansion section, and then I do compression, then I do the EQ section. And normally I'm driving this a lot more. It'll be like 5 or 6 dB here kind of situation. And then what I do is I control it here with the I control it here with this high-low pass filter. That's a little trick I learned. I'm like, wow, that sounds really good. If you just drop this down here like that to 30 hertz and stuff, and then start driving it to like up to like 6 or 7, and but then cutting here with the high pass filter, it sounds absolutely phenomenal. So, you know, food for thought there kind of situation. There's more than one way of coming at a problem, and I didn't understand that for a very, very long time. Same thing with the high end. You can start just driving it. Now, listen, you got to be much more careful up here. And really, it's a combination of these two with this other gain one. I didn't really realize the connection with the colors. I just thought it was arbitrary, but there is sort of like, I don't know if it's real or not. I feel like it's real, the Bermuda Triangle here, but this V gain actually really makes a big difference with respect to how the high end reacts. So another little thing, this used to be off all the time. I'm like, V gain, I don't know what that is. Get lost. But it kind of has like this tightening effect. So again, this is the secret sauce here, going from this one saturation into a channel strip, which you're adding more saturation, right? Of course, with the compression and whatnot. Look at, I'm really compressing it here at 5:1. And normally this is at -10, right? I'm driving it to 0. And in other cases, I'm as high as like 10, right? So it's pretty hostile, or sorry, whatever, the threshold at -10. I guess +10, I can barely see here. Wow, I need glasses. Okay, so there's that. Now let's talk about the parallel stuff. Essentially, after I'm done sort of, you know, cleaning up the signal, that's what I'm doing here. This whole chain here is to take a pretty unruly guitar signal and put it through a series of stages with respect to processing to control that dynamic range and clean it up and make it so I can do something with it right up here at this upper stage. I'm not really trying to make it sound good here. This just takes out all the mud and boxiness and the nastiness in the inherent guitar sound that just comes out of the Helix. And from there, I want to send it up, right? Using this saturation technique that I learned from Jason Joshua. And from there, boom, it goes up to the main fader. And from this main fader now, that sound is going to bounce down. Now, in the case of the guitars, you'll see me go through this stereo widening. Now, listen, I do stereo widening on the drums, on the guitars, on the clean guitars, on the vocals, and it's also on the keyboards. And if there were other instruments here, like acoustic guitars, it'd be on those too. So this thing is insanely important. I don't care which one you get. I just got this one And I was using the S1 from Waves, and this one just absolutely destroys it. It's a fantastic plugin. I think I got it for like 20 bucks. Now, I got it with other plugins, but still, this one is phenom. And of course, look at, again, this is another trick. You don't just put it on the stereo widening because it'll be like, yeah, it sounds pretty good, but yeah. Now you can go in and EQ and look at this one. I got this one here essentially also from, you know, Plugin Alliance. I like their plugins a lot, and I always get deals from them, so it's just makes a lot of sense. But another channel strip, in this case, it's very precise. So with respect to this one, it really crisps it up. And what I'm doing is actually working on the sound of the side of the thing, right? The outsides. So I can make it sound either brighter or darker, depending, to sort of make the music sound fuller or, you know, more subtle. And then, of course, again, look at this low-end filtration. Like, that's just crazy, right, with this high-pass filter. But it's set at like 6,200 hertz. But that's my point. You see, in this case, I'm giving it a huge cut here too in the low end, because in the SPL I'm probably driving it. Yeah, you see, even though I have the bass off, just by turning up the bigness of the guitar sounds and everything, it just makes it massive. And then when I added this, it just brought it right into perfection, so that the guitars just sounded absolutely punishing. This step right here, this low end or high end filtration, or both, I'm telling you, that is one of the secret weapons of the audio engineer. So a lot of times when you're like, it just sounds muddy and sort of messy, one of these will be your best friend. And this plugin is $19, and it's absolutely killer. It comes with a whole bunch of different sort of like filter units, and all it does is high end and low end filtration. Just these two knobs. Okay, so it's pretty self-explanatory, and you can either just move the knob itself or move the joystick. I don't know why that's there. Whatever. And there's other stuff. You can also reverse the phase, which is pretty cool, but that's another one. So again, this low-end filtration at the very end of this chain, right? The stereo widening where I EQ it, and then, of course, at the very end, chop off a huge portion of the low end because it was messing with the stuff up here in the guitars in the next section. That made all the difference in the world to making the guitars absolutely punishing, but they were dull. So again, in this case, now I'm doing the filtration beforehand. I don't want this low end going into this plugin. And then I use this plugin to just basically destroy the high end. Look at 20K and 16. I've got it set at 10 and 10, right? So I'm just absolutely driving at 7 at 4K. Now, again, I'm mixing in mid-side here. Sometimes you got to flip the switch for mid-side in stereo just to get an idea if it sounds like muddier or whatever it is. Go to mid-side and then start and break the parameter links so you can mix them independently, and then just do the lows first, and then the next section, turn it on, off, blah, blah, blah. And you're good to go. Look, I don't even use any part of the low end section here with respect to the mid because it sounds awesome. But when it came to the side, I'm just, it's gone. 11, right? That's the max to cut at 240. Right? And then again, another cut here at 100 hertz. So I'm just absolutely getting rid of everything here and leaving basically everything in as far as the mid is concerned. So things aren't as always, you know, apparent, if you will. But again, another instance here where you see this high-low filtration. This can be one of your most effective tools, and you can do this with almost any piece of software. You can just use its standard EQ and just do a low-pass or high-pass filter like this, and then another piece of software, whether it's this one here, it does like EQ through saturation. It's pretty cool. But they're all the same, right? It's basically a fancy EQ. That's it. And then in doing that, I'm obviously controlling how much of the low end goes into this, which makes me able to drive some of these functions a little harder, and it sounds cleaner and nicer, right? And it complements the guitar rather than actually take away from it. And last but not least here, another one there, high-low pass filtration again at the very bottom. Now, this is a cool little trick. This plugin is amazing, and it's 20 bucks. It's the Vitalizer. I highly recommend it. Lets you focus your instruments like guitars and vocals and basically anything. It's just one of the most utilitarian piece of hard or software based on hardware too that you can actually get. If I was actually buying hardware, I'd buy the real one. The I think it's on version 3 now or something like that. But this thing is just absolutely killer. But running something into a preamp like this, where you can then sort of shape again some aspects of the EQ curve, but just add saturation. Look at, I'm absolutely pinning the input volume and the output. I'm just driving this unit, but I'm doing a massive cut here to the bass and the mid-range, basically no mid-range, none. And then doing this huge high-end push, right? It's stuff like that where you kind of mix a combination of plugins that work together to get the final result. And even after I did that, I still had to add this one and then be like, oh, I got to roll off here on the high end, and I got to roll off a bit on the low end to really get the maximum benefit. But the idea that you're going through this plugin to sort of like focus the sound, and then you can run through a preamp and actually shape it and make it fatter and bigger instead of using saturation or EQ or something like that, is a wonderful little trick I found. And there's lots of these free preamps, and of course there's lots of preamps that you can just get that are relatively inexpensive. It's a great tool. I love this one from Black Rooster Audio. Their plugins are fantastic. I think I got their entire suite for $100 or just over $100. I mean, just awesome. And this thing is just mint. So you can't ask for any more. And of course, these tracks, you can see now that I'm blending them in here, the volumes. Now the widener itself is at 0. So, but I control, you know, to a certain degree how loud the input volume is going in, right? So in this case, that's probably why it was giving me such a hard time earlier. Nice food for thought there. These sort of input volumes can make a big difference in terms of sound quality if it hits it too hard, kind of deal. So whoops, but you know what I mean? In the other cases, they're all at 0 or just small sort of like alterations, and then I do a big volume cut here because they all go to the master outs. This one goes to the master out, and these ones go to the master out too, and that's just it. Each one of these does an instrument. There's the drums. This is for electric guitars. This is for clean guitars. There's the ones for vocals. Basically, I have this really crazy sort of EQ on here. And again, going through the stereo widening process, if you will. But this thing is just mental, and it sounds so good, man. Like this right here is the secret sauce when it comes to vocals and whatnot. And really when it comes to just doing music instruments in general, where you start to run through one plugin, in this case, the stereo widener, but then you take that output and you put it through something else. In this case, this VSS, which is just a fancy sort of series of EQs, right? There's the high-low pass filtration. There's a compressor. There's, I don't know what this is. Discrete gyrator EQ. Okay, sounds interesting. Saturation, obviously another EQ stage. And then your output volume, right? So this is really interesting. I can't wait to start to really mess with it and whatnot. But again, just putting it through here is what I did before, without this extra stage. And that's when I realized, with respect to vocals here, I really wanted this tube saturation aspect and the compression saturation, right? I don't care if this goes on or off, and you can just put them on and drive the input and whatnot, because I also like to add things like easy mix and stuff like that on the vocals. I don't know if it's on. Yeah, it is, but it's off. This another secret weapon one, if you just get easy mix 2 or 3 or whatever it is now, and just get the ones for vocals, that has a huge body of presets for vocals that you can put on at the very end after you do this. And man, it just takes it over the top. It just goes from being like, yeah, that's pretty damn good, to being like, damn, that sounds really good. Right? And now with this extra widening effect and the the effects down here, of course, which is really just a delay, no big deal. One for the more extreme vocals, and the other ones for just the regular singing vocals. And then it just goes through, your sort of standard sidechain compression with some more EQing, right? Like there's always the EQ, there's the compressor, I'm doing the sidechain, right? And then of course there's my EQ curve done. It's no big deal. And of course I'm adjusting these every single time, but I think you get the broad strokes is that I have this raw information down here that I'm going to work with. This is where I do all the recordings down here, whether it's one track and you just have left and right, 1 and 2, and you do it that way, or you do it like me where I like to have 3 or 4. It's your call, but basically you're going to take that. You can see I've got no effects on them, and I'm going to take it up and I'm going to sort of clean it up. Clean up the low end, make it more consistent from a dynamic approach, you know, do a little bit of compression, make sure you use a compressor that can handle guitars. That's why this one has top and bottom controls, right? And then of course send it up here through your sort of like standard double saturation is what I call this technique, where I go through this channel strip here where it doesn't really have anything, but I give it a little boost of saturation, you know, simulated, if you will, in the digital world. And then I saturate again when I go into this SSL, right? And then of course I make all of my necessary moves. And from here I'm outputting to a series of tracks depending on what I need for guitars or other instruments. And it's a done deal. See, I've got like 3 different delays down here for the solos and whatnot. But the drums has just got a widening aspect, but that's a cool one. You can see me, again, widen the thing, then I compress it, and then I EQ it, right? So again, another sort of simple technique, but notice you can see me running it through multiple sort of versions of these plugins. Again, this is like what I call passive saturation. You might put these on 3 separate tracks rather than running through them each other, right? And of course, if you look at the compressor, look at, I'm absolutely destroying it. So it's really focusing the drums into this really tight, punchy package, right? And then of course, I give it a bit of top end, you know, a little bit of just the magic where I'm not even actually adding anything to the frequencies here. I just make tiny adjustments to the frequency range and you're like, oh man, that sounds killer, right? And that's all it takes. Done deal. But also running through the 3 together after you already ran it through 2 or 3 to get to the ones up here. Obviously, when it gets to the master output, it's just sounding absolutely crushing. And last but not least, we'll talk about this, the master out. I always go through, a compressor here. Again, in this case, mid side. Again, you're going to have to test there to see exactly what you should do, but the mid side one I find sounds the best on the master 2 output. That's a big one. So if you have a compressor that you're going to do, otherwise just do a standard stereo one and just your standard EQ here. Now, obviously this is a fancy one, but it's relatively expensive. All these plugins you can get for at least 20 or 30 bucks. I've seen them hundreds of times on Plugin Alliance on sale and stuff like that. So, and they work amazing. They're as good as they are today as they were when they were released 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. And they just do updates. This Alicia here, which I just got for 20 bucks, is $150 right now, is absolutely jaw-dropping. It's an update to the previous version. And with this extra sort of piece down here and just the revision of the algorithm, holy smokes, man, this thing is just, it blew the other compressor away. Okay, the Townhouse, which was nice and full and meaty, but this thing is just like a laser. It's just amazing. And of course, last but not least, yeah, of course, a tiny bit of EQ. This is the one I like to do at the very end, just a tiny bit of low end control, a little boost here in the low mids, a little boost in the high mids, and then of course, or the high frequencies, and then of course a tiny little cut at the high end, and that's it. Notice it's not even, this is a like a low shelf and not an actual sort of like low pass filter. So all of these things actually matter in terms of getting things done, but the big broad strokes is I like to have all of these tracks from here, the blue ones, all the way down here to where the bottom of the vocals here, as one thing that I call the master output tracks. Okay, so everything kind of goes through there, everything, right? So the guitars bounce up here, which then go down here, and if there's other things, it's there, right? And of course, the other thing is building these modules. There's the drums. We're going to look at that next when we build the drum track here. Then I have one for guitars. There's clean guitars. There's the bass guitar. We'll look at just adding keyboards and stuff like that for VST instruments. It's really straightforward. And then you're just off to the races. Trust me, being able to just select the empty space, right click, go up to a menu and just select the thing that you want to drop in there, like some guitar solos, right? Oops. Maybe we should do that. Sometimes I like to add a track in there because, oops, it'll put it there. Yeah, see, it puts it below. I did Pierre's rhythm guitar, but you get the idea. You just drop it in there, you hit record, and boom, you're already set up. And then when you listen back to it, it's already going through a series of effects and stuff like that where you've given it a treatment which will already give you like basically a pretty polished guitar sound, which means you have to do way less work in post-production, and just over time you keep refining it until it's just, that's your guitar sound. And there it is, a couple basic principles, right? Refining things, then putting it in through a saturation stage, pumping it up using the gain, sending it up to a channel strip, where you're going to, again, give it a bit more saturation, taking it from the channel strip and then putting it down into a series of parallel tracks. And obviously, this distorted guitar has both my guitars and Pierre's guitars. It has the half distorted guitars and then both solos. So it's not just, just my guitars. It's the whole mix is running through this particular effect to give it this wideness, if you will, so it gives it continuity and stuff like that. Right, you're just seeing me boil it down to just one track here. And again, you can see that there are me making alterations, if you will, to the actual configuration of volume. That's a huge step where you can control the volume coming out of this channel that goes into this one, and then also control the master volume that goes out to the 2 bus. And again, what do we call that? Gain staging. So a lot of times you want to turn this all the way off and leave the other one sort of at like -2 or -5 or -3 or whatever it is, and then start dialing this in until it gets to a place, and then go back into the other one here and start messing with the volume. Be like, if I turn it down, does it sound better? And turn the other one up and be like, nah, that sounds worse. And then turn this one back up and turn the other one down and be like, that's the sweet spot. Stuff like that. That's gain staging, if you will. Same thing by messing around with the volume here in relation to the gain here, right, in relation to this vertical gain. Again, moving down to this one, you're talking about the gain staging here in just this plugin. And there's more gain staging going from the SPL transient shaper here into this limiter compressor, if you will, into the compressor itself, and then finally being EQ'd up. So you can see that every step of this way, there is some measure of gain staging. And if you make a mistake in sort of building it up properly, like this one and this one are basically equal in volume. But once I go here, if I were to turn that off and then turn it on, you'd hear that it would drop down in volume and then go up in volume because I'm driving the input and dropping the output, right? And so on and so forth. Exactly the same principle over here where I'm turning down this master fader, but I'm really driving the input gain. And of course, I'm controlling how much of the master input is affecting this entire plugin. And I'm also controlling some of the output with respect to how everything on this part of the plugin is working. This volume knob controls this THD, or the totality of this, plus this input gain, plus the fader, right? All three. And of course, there's also this extra function up here where you can now start assigning it to various channels and stuff like that, but that's another day, right? But you get my point here is that all of those things work together to actually make your recordings sound good. And just when you're setting up your recordings, you should be thinking like that. Like, I want to clean my signal up. I want to put it through a channel strip and drive the input gain a little bit. And then I want to move up to another situation here where I want to have more control. But again, this preamp stage. Now listen, you can do the preamp like we did down here. You could just put that here before you have an EQ and then a compressor. You don't have to have it all built into just one plugin. You could have this section here as one plugin. You could have this EQ as another plugin, and then just mess with the order so you're like good to go. Now, obviously, the preamp's going to be the first thing you go into and you're going to shape. Then you're probably going to want to do filtration so that you can start messing with it. If you have to start driving things like the low end and the high end, you can make subtle adjustments here to sort of keep it all under control. But that right there, if you follow those basic principles, your recordings will sound absolutely killer. So I hope this video helps to a large degree. Just start small. I have 60 tracks because I've been doing recordings for like 6 or 7 years now. And trust me, this used to be 100. So I've smoked a whole bunch of them and I've condensed information down massively. And you can see it's kind of color coded. The delays and reverbs are in yellow. The pinks are basically stereo widening. In this case, blue is for brightening, and the grayish, whatever that is, is for like saturation. This is saturation too, where it says beef. It's just done in a different way. You know, certain effects down here with the vocal I have in maroon. So all of these things just help me navigate this. You know, I can go quickly to the top and be like, oh, those are the master tracks. There's the, you know, the next section moving down. This is just for drums. I'll show you what this does next time when we do the drums. There's the keyboard section, vocals. And then by the time I'm down here, basically this is just the simplified track stuff. And after I'm done sort of doing the initial mixes, I almost never go down there again. So I'm strictly working up here, and usually it's just this very top section right here. And I actually moved the master fader here to be on this, you know, on the actual template, so I don't actually have to bring up the, you know, whatever, the Docker anymore. Just go right here and get it done and stuff. Hotkeys too, you know, I can do a mono and stereo mix like that kind of situation. Very useful. So obviously, all of that stuff matters when you just want to sit down, write some music and get it done because you feel creative. So of course, setting it up in this manner not only gets you really great results, gives you an idea about how you should do some basic recordings and some strategies by creating saturation, building up the signal, if you will, doing high-low pass filtration to control, you know, how muddy or boxy something sounds, and then using parallel tracks for widening and brightening and stuff like that, and even thickening it up, where you combine multiple instruments. In this case down here, I'm using the bass too, along with the heavy guitars. So it's all sort of mashed into this one particular function, but of course, running those all out to the master out, and then compression, EQ, and then of course filtration. That sort of is the holy trinity of all music production. So just that alone will usually get you 90% of the way. So just get a compressor that's pretty universally, you know, versatile, I guess. Get an EQ. Again, there's lots to choose from, and a lot of them are free. And then, of course, you can use the exact same EQ just to do the filtration, or you can track one down like Pro Sweep, and it's $20 and get it done that way, right? And you're off to the races. And then once you do that, you actually give yourself a training platform to really take your music to the next level. I practiced for decades, okay? Like nose to the grindstone, the whole 9 yards. I didn't really start to get really good until I started writing my own music and starting to break it down and really digest what I was doing. And once that happened, total game changer. I want to give you the same opportunity. So thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. I hope the video helps, and we'll see you in the next one.